The morning sun crawled over the peaks of Colorado Springs, brushing gold against the worn shingles of a small cabin on the edge of town. The air smelled faintly of pine and sawdust, the scent of a man who worked with his hands and carried the silence of the mountains inside him. John Miller, 58, limped out to the porch with a cup of black coffee. His knee had never been the same since Iraq, and neither had his sleep. But every morning, like clockwork, he stood there watching the light rise, as if waiting for the world to start forgiving itself. At his feet, a German shepherd sat alert, eyes bright, ears tilted forward. Echo. He wasn't just a dog, he was a soldier too. They had been through fire together. Literally, John could still feel the heat, hear the explosions, smell the metal in the air. And through all of it, Echo never flinched. The dog had saved his life once, maybe twice, depending on how you count staying alive when you didn't really want to. Now, years later, they lived like two ghosts of another world, the soldier and his dog. Inside the cabin, the radio hummed with country songs from the 90s. The walls were lined with tools, old photos, and a single wooden frame that read, "Home is where love lives." That word home, it meant something to John, something sacred. He hadn't grown up with much. His father left when he was 9. His mother worked night shifts at a diner. When he went to war, he told himself that someday, if he made it back, he'd build something better, something that couldn't be taken away. So, for 20 years after coming home, John built furniture for other people's dream houses. He repaired decks, carved stair rails, sanded kitchen tables until they shone like mirrors. Every paycheck, every Christmas bonus, every side job he saved, not for a truck, not for retirement. He saved for a house. Not just any house, a real home for his kids. Alex, his oldest, had always been sharp, business-minded, the kind of kid who could sell a snowball in winter. Sarah, the younger one, that had her mother's heart, gentle, artistic, but fragile in a way that made John worry. Their mother, Linda, had passed 10 years ago. Cancer, quiet and cruel. Since then, John had tried to be both father and mother. Some days he managed, most days he didn't. Still, he promised himself one thing. They'll never feel like drifters, they'll always have a home. That winter, things finally changed. The market had been crazy, prices climbing like ivy. But one afternoon, John's real estate agent called. "There's a place up in Golden, Colorado. Big windows, mountain view, 2 acres of pine. It's above your budget, but the seller's a veteran too." He said he'd rather sell it to someone who'd understand what it means to fight for something. John didn't even hesitate. He sold the cabin, emptied his savings, and signed the papers. When he got the keys, he didn't drive straight there. He stopped by the park first, the same one where he used to bring Alex and Sarah when they were kids, back when they thought life was just swings and popsicles. He sat on the same bench, ran his hand along the cracked wood, and whispered, "It's time, Linda. We finally did it." The new house stood on a hill, overlooking the Golden Slopes west of Denver. It wasn't fancy, just modern wood and stone, clean lines, sunlight everywhere. To John, it looked like peace. He opened the door, the hinges sighing softly, and let Echo run in first. The dog sprinted across the hardwood floor, nose twitching, tail wagging. John laughed, a sound that felt foreign on his own lips. He carried in a single box some clothes, a photo of Linda, and Echo's old service badge. That was all he owned that mattered. Later that evening, after unpacking a few things, he stood in the living room. The sun was melting into the Rockies, flooding the windows with amber light. Dust floated in the air like tiny stars. John placed the house keys on the counter and looked down at Echo, who was watching him expectantly. "We did it, buddy," John said softly. "A real home for the kids." Echo gave a low bark, as if agreeing. For a long moment, John just stood there, a man, a dog, and a dream finally made real. He could already picture it: Thanksgiving dinners, Sarah painting by the window, Alex talking about his next big project, laughter filling every room. Maybe this was it. Maybe peace didn't come with medals or applause. Maybe it came with walls you built for others, and the quiet knowledge that they'd be safe inside. That night, as snow began to fall outside, John sat by the fireplace. Echo lay curled beside him, snoring softly. John opened his old journal, the one he kept from the service, and wrote a single line. "After all the noise, this silence feels like grace." He closed the book, stared at the flames, and smiled. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in white as if trying to make it new again. It was the beginning of something beautiful, or at least, that's what John believed. For now, there was peace. And in that peace, the soldier and his dog finally rested. For a while, life at the house on the hill felt like a dream finally fulfilled. Mornings began with the smell of coffee, bacon, and the soft tapping of Echo's paws on the kitchen floor. The house, once empty and echoing with silence, was now alive, laughter spilling down the halls, toys scattered on the rug, sunlight stretching through the big glass windows. John had his family back. Alex and Sarah had moved in not long after the purchase. Alex came first with his sharp suit, his Bluetooth headset, and that restless energy of a man chasing something invisible. Sarah followed a few weeks later, with her husband and their 2 little ones, Emma and Jack. The day they all arrived, John grilled steaks on the back patio. Echo sat nearby, guarding the meat like it was classified cargo. The air was warm, the smell of pine mixing with smoke. Emma giggled as she tried to toss a bowl to Echo, who caught it mid-air every single time, tail wagging like he'd just won a medal. John looked around the yard, and for a moment, everything felt right, the kind of right you didn't dare question. Every morning after that, John kept busy. He fixed the fence, sanded the porch, built a little playhouse out back for the kids. Sarah decorated the garden with string lights, and at night the place glowed like a scene out of a Christmas movie. Echo became a guardian of the land. He'd patrol the yard at dusk, his silhouette framed against the golden light. Ears pricked to the faintest sound. The neighborhood kids loved him. They'd come running, shouting, "Echo," and he'd greet them like old friends. Inside, John felt something he hadn't in years, peace wrapped in purpose. The sound of children's laughter, the steady rhythm of daily chores, the familiar weight of Echo resting at his feet while he read the paper, it all reminded him why he'd worked so hard. At night, he'd sit on the porch with a beer, look up at the stars, and whisper, "We did good, didn't we, buddy?" Echo would nudge his hand softly in reply, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, the air began to shift. It started with small comments. Alex, who had begun investing in real estate, started talking numbers at the dinner table. "You know, Dad," he'd say, cutting into his steak, "this place could be worth a fortune in 5 years. The market in Golden's exploding. We could leverage that equity, maybe flip a few more properties." John would smile politely. "It's a home, son, not an investment." Alex chuckled, shaking his head. "That's exactly the problem. You're sitting on $1 million asset, and you're just living in it." John didn't argue. He just took another bite, and you're just down to scratch Echo's neck. Some things weren't worth debating. Sarah, on the other hand, drifted toward a different kind of dream. She began redecorating new furniture, scented candles, imported rugs. The house started to look like a magazine spread, elegant, modern, and somehow less like home. "Dad," she said one afternoon, standing in the living room, "that old coffee table doesn't match the new decor. Maybe we could replace it." John glanced at it, the same table he'd built by hand, the one Linda used to rest her tea on every morning. "It's solid oak," he said quietly. "Still holds." Sarah smiled gently, but her tone carried something else. "I know, but it's dated. We're just trying to make this place feel fresh." Fresh. That word lingered, as if what he'd built was something stale, something to be replaced. Weeks passed. Alex spent more time on the phone, pacing the deck, shouting about deals, percentages, ROI. Sarah hosted brunches with friends from the city, women who arrived in shiny SUVs and designer sunglasses, complimenting her beautiful modern space. John kept to himself. He fixed what needed fixing, cooked on weekends, and played catch with the grandkids whenever they asked. But Echo began to notice the tension before anyone else did. Whenever voices rose, his ears would perk, tail stiff. When Alex slammed a door after an argument on the phone, Echo would growl low under his breath. John would calm him, "Easy boy, it's just noise," but Echo's instincts were rarely wrong. One evening, the family gathered for dinner. The sunset spilled gold through the kitchen windows. Alex was talking numbers again, his eyes alight with excitement. "Dad, if we sold this place, we could downsize, reinvest, and triple the return in 2 years. Think about it, a new start, better location, maybe even build something bigger." John set his fork down. "I didn't buy this house to sell it." "Yeah, but you're not using it right." Alex's tone hardened. "This isn't about nostalgia, Dad. It's about being smart." Sarah tried to smooth things over, but even her smile looked strained. "He's just trying to help. Dad, we want what's best for you." John looked at both of them, his grown children, talking like strangers wearing familiar faces, and suddenly, he felt very old. Echo, sensing his unease, pressed his head against John's knee. "I already have what's best for me," John said quietly. The room fell silent. Later that night, when the others had gone to bed, John sat alone in the living room. The new decor glowed under the dim light, sleek, expensive, cold. He reached for the coffee table, the one Sarah had wanted to replace, and ran his hand across its rough surface. Scratches, dents, burn marks. Every flaw told a story. Echo lay beside him, eyes open, ears twitching to the sound of the wind outside. "Funny thing, Echo," John murmured. "You build something to last, and people start thinking it's in the way." Echo let out a soft whine, resting his head on John's boot. Somewhere deep down, John felt the first tremor, that invisible crack forming in the walls of his perfect house. It was small, quiet, almost tender, but it was there, and like all cracks, it would only grow. The snow came late that year. Soft flakes drifted across the yard, settling on the pine branches, melting into quiet puddles along the porch. From the kitchen window, John watched Echo nose through the frost, his breath visible in the cold air. The old dog still had that soldier's posture, steady, alert, patient, as if he were guarding something that only he could see. Inside, the warmth felt different now. The laughter that once filled the house had thinned into polite conversation. The dinners had become quieter, shorter. John felt it in the air, like a chill that crept in through the cracks of the walls. It started with a single remark over breakfast. Alex was scrolling on his phone, coffee in hand. "Dad, we need to talk about Echo," he said, not looking up. John glanced up from his plate. "What about him?" Alex sighed, setting the mug down. "He sheds everywhere, the hairs on the couch, the carpet, the kids' clothes. Maybe it's time he starts sleeping outside. He's a working dog, he'll be fine." John put his fork down slowly. His voice stayed calm, but firm. "He's been by my side through bombs and bullets. Son, I'm not putting him out in the cold." Across the table, Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Her husband cleared his throat. "It's just for hygiene. You know, the kids play on the floor, and Emma's been sneezing a lot. We're just thinking about their health." John nodded slightly. "I understand that, but Echo's clean. I wash him myself every week." Still, Sarah added gently, "It might be better if he stays outside during the day. He's not a puppy anymore." Echo, lying under the table, lifted his head, eyes darting from one face to another, reading the room the way only dogs can. His tail didn't move. John reached down, resting a hand on the dog's back. "He stays," he said quietly. No one argued, but the silence that followed said enough. In the days that came after, things grew heavier in small, unspoken ways. Alex spent more time on calls, closing deals, talking about expansion and moving forward. Sarah stopped asking her father's opinion on anything. She just did what she wanted and expected him to adapt. John began to notice things changing around him. Echo's bed was moved from the living room to the mudroom. The dog's food bowl was relocated near the back door. Subtle shifts, polite, practical, but unmistakable. When John asked, Sarah smiled carefully. "It's just easier for everyone, Dad. The house stays cleaner this way." He didn't argue. He just nodded, slow and tired. That night, while everyone slept, he sat in the mudroom beside Echo. The floor was cold. The air faintly smelled of soap and pine cleaner. Echo's eyes met his, calm and knowing. "They just don't get it," John whispered. "You're more family than most people ever were." Echo nudged his hand, pressing his nose into John's palm. That small gesture, quiet, loyal, said everything words never could. One evening, after a long day of repairs in the yard, John came inside and paused near the hallway. Voices drifted from the living room, low, careful, but sharp enough to cut through the dark. Sarah's husband spoke first. "He's too old to understand, Sarah. He won't change, and we can't move forward with him and that damn dog around all the time." Sarah sighed. "Don't say that. He's our father." "Then act like it's temporary." Alex's voice joined in, smooth, decisive. "We'll make it easy for him, maybe find him a smaller place, somewhere quiet. This house is too much for him, and Echo's just another problem. We have to think long term." There was a pause. Then Sarah's soft voice, breaking, "I just don't want to hurt him." "You won't," Alex said. "He'll understand." John stood there in the hallway, half in shadow. The clock ticked steadily, each second like a hammer against the inside of his chest. Echo, who had been resting near the doorway, lifted his head, ears twitching. A low, warning growl rumbled in his throat, not loud, but deep enough to shake something inside the room. John placed a hand on the dog's back. "Easy, boy," he whispered. Echo looked up at him, eyes wide, searching as if asking whether to stay silent or defend. John gave a small shake of his head. "Not tonight." They stood there a long time, man and dog, framed in the dim glow of the hallway light. Then John turned and walked back to his room. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand still resting on Echo's fur, feeling the slow rhythm of his breathing. "You hear that?" he murmured. "They think I'm old, that we're in their way." He let out a bitter laugh. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm too stubborn to understand their world. Echo pressed closer, head against John's knee. But you know what, boy? John's voice softened. I'd rather be stubborn than heartless. The dog's tail gave a faint thump on the floor once, steady, like an answer. That night, John couldn't sleep. The wind hissed through the chimney, and somewhere outside, a branch scraped against the siding with every gust. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Linda, about how she would have handled this, how her warmth had once kept the family together. Without her, everything had started to drift like boards coming loose on a house that no one bothered to repair. At dawn, he rose quietly, dressed, and stepped outside with Echo. Frost glazed the grass, and the mountains stood like silent witnesses beyond the ridge. John inhaled deeply. The air was sharp, clean, almost holy. Guess we're still here, he said to Echo. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, uncovering patches of green grass and the pale bones of winter underneath. From the porch, John could see the mountains breathing again, still, strong, unmoved. He liked to sit there with Echo every morning, coffee in hand, the smell of pine drifting through the air. It was his quiet ritual before the noise of the house woke up. But lately, even the mornings didn't feel like his anymore. Alex had been talking about paperwork for weeks. Something about refinancing, taxes, new mortgage structures, words that rolled off his tongue with that effortless confidence John used to admire. One afternoon he came into the kitchen holding a folder, a smile that was just a bit too tight. "Dad, can I grab a few minutes?" Alex asked. John nodded, setting down his mug. "Sure, son, what's going on?" Alex spread the papers on the table. "Just some refinance forms. It'll help lower the payments and free up some capital for future projects. It's all routine. I already talked to the bank." John looked at the stack of papers. His eyes traced the lines, the fine print words like transfer, title, ownership. He had seen too many contracts in his life to not understand what they meant. He stayed quiet, letting the silence hang. Alex mistook it for confusion. "Don't worry, Dad. It's just numbers and bank language. You trust me, right?" John met his son's eyes for a long moment. There was no anger there, just a tired kind of understanding. He took the pen and said softly, "If it helps you build your future, I'll sign anything." He signed each page, slow and steady. Echo sat at his feet, watching. When it was done, John patted his son's shoulder. "Make sure it's worth it." Alex smiled, relieved, maybe even proud, and left to answer a phone call before John could say anything else. Echo's ears twitched as the door closed. He looked up at John, sensing the weight that had settled over the room. "I know, boy," John whispered. "I know what I just did." Weeks passed, then months. The changes started small. Painters came first, then new furniture, then strange contractors moving in and out of rooms John once called his own. His workshop was cleared out for storage. His photos were moved for redecorating. Even his old recliner, the one he'd repaired 3 times, disappeared without a word. When he asked, Sarah smiled politely. "It's all part of the remodel, Dad. We're just updating things." He didn't argue. He'd seen war turn cities to dust. He knew that nothing, not even a home, stays the same forever. But when he came home one day and found his bedroom door gone, replaced by glass, the room filled with shelves and screens, something inside him went still. "What happened here?" he asked quietly. Alex looked up from his laptop. "We turned it into a home office. You don't need the extra space anyway, Dad. We set up a small room for you in the basement. It's quieter there." Echo stood in the doorway, tail low, looking between them. John nodded slowly. "A home office," he repeated, the words tasting strange. "Nice." From then on, Echo was no longer allowed inside. At first, it was just during meal times, then only when guests come over. Eventually, the rule hardened. Echo stays outside. John built a small wooden shelter for him by the fence, lined with old blankets and cedar chips. Each night, he'd sneak out after everyone was asleep, sit beside the doghouse, and whisper stories into the cold air, half to the dog, half to himself. "You're doing fine, soldier," he'd say. "They just don't remember where this all started." Echo would rest his head on John's knee, eyes half closed as if to remind him that not everything built on love could be taken away. One Sunday morning, Sarah came into the living room with her usual calm. The kids were at a friend's house, and Alex had gone to meet investors. She stood for a moment, hands clasped, like she was rehearsing something in her head. "Dad," she began, "we've been talking and we think it's time you had a place that's more comfortable." John looked up from his coffee. "Comfortable?" "Yes," she said quickly. "There's a senior facility just outside town. They have great care, open space, even a little You'd love it there. John didn't answer. He just stared at her until she looked away. She took a breath and kept going. Echo can't stay, though, but there's a shelter nearby. They work with veterans. They'll take good care of him. The room went silent. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed to fade. John's hand trembled slightly as he set the mug down. He glanced toward the back door where Echo lay on the porch, looking in through the glass. Finally, he spoke. You want to throw out a soldier and his partner? He asked, voice steady but low. Go ahead. We've been through worse. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Dad, please don't make this harder. John rose from his chair. I'm not making it hard. Life already did that. He walked past her, opened the door, and stepped outside. Echo stood up instantly, tail wagging faintly, as if waiting for orders. John knelt beside him, brushing a hand through his fur. Pack light, buddy, he whispered. Looks like we're moving again. By afternoon, the rain had started soft at first, then relentless. John filled an old duffel with his clothes, a framed photo of the kids, a Bible, and Echo's leash. Sarah tried to stop him at the door, tears streaming down her face. Dad, you don't have to go like this. We were just trying to help. John shook his head gently. No, sweetheart, you were trying to forget. He kissed her forehead, turned away, and opened the gate. Echo trotted beside him, fur soaked within minutes. Behind them, the lights of the house glowed warm against the gray sky. The home he'd built his pride. His purpose now belonged to someone else. John didn't look back. He just walked slow but sure, down the long road that led away from everything he'd ever built. Echo stayed at his side, silent except for the steady rhythm of his paws on the wet pavement. For the first time in a long while, John felt something like peace. It was sharp and cold, but it was his. And when they disappeared into the rain, man and dogs side by side, it was as if two shadows had simply returned to where they'd come from, back to the only truth they ever trusted, that loyalty once given never leaves. The rain came down steady that morning, not in bursts or thunder, but in a soft, relentless way that seeps into your bones. The kind of rain that makes the world look like it's holding its breath. John Miller stood by the front door, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, its canvas darkened by old stains and newer ones forming fast. Inside it were only a few things that mattered: 2 shirts, a folded pair of jeans, a photo of his kids when they were still little, and Echo's worn leather leash. The house behind him, his dream home, was alive with muffled sounds, cabinets closing, the hum of the dishwasher, the low murmur of voices upstairs, carefully avoiding him. The same house he built, repaired, and loved, now seemed to hum in indifference. Echo sat beside him, tail still, eyes fixed on the door like he understood every unspoken word. The dog's fur was beginning to gray around the muzzle, but his stance was still alert, proud, a soldier's posture. John looked around the living room one last time. The photographs on the mantel had changed. His old army photo was gone. The picture of the kids with Echo gone, too. In its place, decorative prints, abstract art, and something coldly perfect. He reached out and touched the wooden frame of the doorway, the one he had sanded and stained by hand. Guess we didn't make the cut, boy? He murmured. Echo's ears twitched, the faintest whine escaping him. Just then, a small voice broke through the quiet. Grandpa. It was Lily, his granddaughter, standing at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed bunny. Her eyes were red, her cheeks wet. She ran down the steps before anyone could stop her, nearly slipping on the last one. Grandpa, don't go. Echo will be cold, she cried, wrapping her arms around his leg. John knelt down, ignoring the pain that shot through his knee. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and smiled, a tired, gentle smile that hid a heartbreak too deep for words. He's handled worse weather than this, sweetheart, but Mommy said. I know what Mommy said. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. Sometimes groans forget things that matter. But you remember. Okay. You remember Echo's a hero. She nodded, biting her lip hard. Echo leaned forward and licked her hand, tail wagging once, like a final salute. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face drawn tight with guilt and fear of confrontation. Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. John stood slowly, the pain in his leg making him wobble for a moment before he steadied himself. He adjusted the strap of his bag and took the leash. I'm not the one making it hard. He opened the door. Cold air and rain rushed in that clean, earthy smell of Colorado storms. Echo stepped forward first, as always, waiting by the porch steps. John turned back one last time, his daughter's silhouette framed by the warm light inside, the little girl clutching her bunny, tears streaming silently. For a second, he thought of the day he'd carried them both out of a burning trailer years ago. the same instinct pushing through him: protect, endure, forgive, but this time, forgiveness hurt more than fire ever could. He forced a smile, soft and broken. You take care of each other now. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud, not slammed, not forced, just final. Rain beaded on his jacket as he stepped out into the yard. The gravel crunched under his boots, mixing with the steady patter of rain. Echo trotted beside him, soaked but undeterred, glancing up every few steps to make sure John was still there. At the gate, John hesitated. His hands, old and scarred, rested on the latch. Behind them, the laughter of a life that no longer belonged to him. Ahead, the open road, the smell of wet pine, and a silence that felt honest. He pushed the gate open. The hinges groaned like they, too, mourned the moment. As the gate closed behind them with a metallic click, Echo turned his head back toward the house and let out a low growl. Deep, rumbling, not of anger but of knowing, a sound that came from the soul of loyalty itself. John reached down, ran his hand over Echo's wet fur, and whispered, "Let it go, partner, we've been through worse." Echo pressed against his leg, steadying him as they walked. Man and dog, two silhouettes merging into the silver curtain of rain. For a long stretch of road, neither spoke, of course, but their silence was full of years shared, promises kept, and a grief too sacred to name. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. Echo perked his ears but didn't flinch. His tail wagged faintly, not in joy, but recognition. This he understood. Storms were easy, humans were harder. John pulled his jacket tighter and looked down the misty road. The city lights of golden shimmered faintly in the distance, blurred by rain. "You know, Echo," he said quietly, "maybe this ain't the end. Maybe it's just another start." The dog glanced up, eyes bright through the rain, and nudged his hand. "Yeah," John said, half smiling, one step at a time. They kept walking until the house was just a glow, swallowed by fog, until the only sounds were rain, breath, and the faint jingle of Echo's tack. Two soldiers, exiled but undefeated, marching once more into the unknown. The road to Aspen wound through long stretches of golden silence. Autumn had come early that year, the kind that painted every ridge and treetop in molten light. When John Miller and Echo finally reached the cabin, it was near dusk. The sky had turned that bruised purple that always meant the day was done, and the world was ready to rest. The cabin wasn't much. 2 rooms, a tin roof that creaked when the wind hit it, and a chimney that leaned a little too far east. But to John, it looked like freedom, quiet, solid, and far away from everything that had gone wrong. He'd found the place through an old friend, a fellow veteran named Hank, who'd offered it for cheap. "Needs work," Hank had said over the phone, "but the roof doesn't leak, and the wood stove still breathes fire. You and that mud of yours will be just fine." He was right. That first night, John unpacked the essentials: a cot, a few cans of beans, Echo's blanket, and the photograph of his kids. He placed the photo on the windowsill, facing the forest. "They're still out there," he said quietly, mostly to himself. "Just lost." Echo circled the room, sniffing every corner, tail wagging slowly. He stopped by the old fireplace and looked back at John, as if asking permission. "Go ahead," John smiled. "Make it yours." Echo curled up by the hearth as the fire crackled to life. The orange glow flickered across the cabin walls, lighting the dust in the air like little constellations. For the first time in a long time, John felt the kind of warmth that didn't come from a roof for a paycheck. It came from peace. The days that followed moved slow and steady. John woke with the sunrise, brewed coffee over a small gas stove, and stood on the porch watching the mist lift off the trees. He'd cast his fishing line into the river by not because he needed the fish, but because the rhythm of it, the quiet weight, the sound of water felt like medicine. Echo sat nearby, ears flicking at every ripple. The perfect century. Afternoons were for small repairs. John fixed the steps that sagged, patched the window cracks, and sanded the railing smooth. His hands, once calloused by war and labor, I found a new kind of purpose, making things whole again. Sometimes, local kids from the nearby town would wander up the trail, curious about the quiet old man and his big shepherd. They'd bring busted bikes or rusted tools, and John would fix them. No charge. "Guess I'm the mountain mechanic now," he'd joke, tightening a bolt or oiling a chain. One boy, maybe 12, asked once, "Mister, don't you ever get lonely up here?" John smiled, glancing at Echo, who was sprawled under the porch in the shade. "Not with that guy around. He's better company than most folks I've met." The boy laughed and nodded. "He looks like he'd die for you." John's eyes softened. He already almost did, that night. He sat by the fire, sipping coffee gone cold, and thought about those words. Echo lifted his head, sensing the weight in the air, and nudged John's hand with his nose. "I know, buddy," John said, scratching behind his ear. "We've been through worse, haven't we? But this right here, it feels like old times." Outside, the forest hummed with crickets and the low sigh of wind through the pines. Inside, Echo's steady breathing filled the space. There were moments when John caught himself wishing things had gone differently, that his kids had understood what home really meant. Not square footage, not design or decor, but this. A place where hearts rested easy, where loyalty had no expiration date, but bitterness never stayed long. The woods had a way of washing that out of him. Winter crept in slow. The first snow came one morning while John was chopping wood. Fat flakes drifted down through the trees, landing on Echo's fur like bits of ash. The dog barked once sharp and joyful, then started bounding in circles, kicking up snow like a pup again. John laughed so hard he had to lean on his axe for balance. "Look at you, soldier," he said between breaths. "Acting like you've never seen snow before." They spent that night inside, the storm roaring outside like an old engine. Echo lay by the fire, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the crackle of logs. John wrote a letter to Sarah, one he'd probably never send. He wrote about the sound of the creek at dawn, about how Echo still guarded the cabin like it was a base camp. He told her he forgave her, even if she didn't ask for it. He ended with one line: "You can buy a house, sweetheart, but you can't buy peace." When he finished, he folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Some things weren't meant for mailboxes. Some were meant just to be said. As the fire dimmed, he leaned back in his chair, feeling Echo's warmth against his boots. "Guess it's just you and me again, buddy," he murmured. "Feels like old times." Echo let out a deep sigh, half growl, half contentment, the kind of sound only old dogs make when they know everything's okay, at least for now. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and endless, wrapping the cabin in a white stillness. Inside, a man and his dog sat side by side, not rich, not poor, just free, and for the first time in years, John Miller slept through the night. The storm came faster than anyone expected, not the kind that rolls over mountains or sweeps through trees, but the kind that tears through lives in silence. In the city below the Rockies, the house on Willow Ridge still looked perfect from the outside. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, a view worth $1 million, but behind its bright windows, everything was rotting. Alex Miller had always been the ambitious one, the man with plans, connections, and a confidence that filled every room. After his father left, he poured himself into real estate. "Dad gave us a foundation," he'd told Sarah once. "Now it's our turn to build something bigger." But bigger came with a price. The market had been booming until it wasn't. The whispers started first, rates climbing, buyers vanishing, investors pulling out. Alex ignored them. "It's a dip," he said, clicking through spreadsheets late into the night. "We'll be fine." He wasn't fine. To fund his new project, a luxury condo complex near Denver, he'd taken out a second mortgage on the family home. The papers had looked clean. The math had looked right. Then, in a single quarter, everything collapsed. The phone calls came first, then the letters, then the silence. By the time he realized how deep he was in, it was too late. His name was on everything, his assets tied up, his promises written in ink that now felt like blood. When Sarah found out, she was furious. "You used Dad's house. Are you out of your mind?" Alex's face was pale, his suit rumpled, his voice low. "It was supposed to double our wealth. Sarah, we could have secured everything. For the family." She laughed, bitter, sharp. "For the family. You kicked the family out, remember?" The words hung in the air like a gunshot neither could take back. After that, they barely spoke. Alex spent his days on the phone with lawyers and bankers, his nights staring out at the dark horizon from the deck, the same deck where his father once grilled burgers, where laughter used to echo through the trees. Sarah's world crumbled next. Her husband, Michael, had grown tired of her endless comparisons, her obsession with image, her resentment of the simple life they'd thrown away when the money started running dry. So did his patience. One evening, after another argument, he packed a single suitcase and said quietly, "You turned your back on the only man who ever loved you without condition." She didn't have to ask who he meant. The divorce papers came a month later. She lost custody of her daughter. The house, the dream she'd decorated to perfection, was suddenly too big, too quiet, too empty. By spring, the bank had moved in. It started with a letter taped to the door, notice of foreclosure. Then came the inspectors, the appraisers, the quiet men in gray suits who walked through every room with clipboards and no emotion. Alex tried to fight it. "We can restructure," he pleaded. "I've got assets tied up." But the man across the table just shook his head. "You had assets. You have debt. And just like that, the dream died. Sarah came by the day the movers cleared out. The house looked smaller now. Emptier, boxes stacked in the hallway, dust where photos once hung. She found Alex sitting on the floor of the living room, staring at a half-empty bottle of bourbon and a pile of unopened mail. His eyes were red but dry. "They're taking it all," he said, voice hollow. She didn't answer. She just knelt beside him and picked up a fallen picture frame, one of the old family photos. It was from years ago. John standing proudly in front of the newly bought house, Echo at his feet, Alex and Sarah beside him, arms around each other. As she brushed off the dust, the glass cracked. A thin line ran right through John's face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Rain began to pour, tapping against the windows like the soft beat of regret. Sarah stood and walked to the door. The foreclosed sign was already nailed into the yard. The rain made the ink run, leading the letters down into the soil as if the house itself were crying. She stepped onto the porch, clutching the torn photo to her chest. The paper was damp now, soft and fragile. Her fingers trembled as she tried to smooth it flat, but the part of her father's face that had split was gone, folded into the crease forever. Behind her, Alex muttered, "What are we gonna do now?" She turned, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Maybe we should go home." He frowned. "Home?" Sarah's eyes lifted toward the mountains far away, hidden under clouds. "Yeah, the real one." The rain came harder then, washing down the walls, darkening the wood, filling the silence between them. For the first time in years, they weren't angry, just small, human. And somewhere up in the high country, in a little cabin where a fire still burned and a dog still kept watch, the man they had cast out sat quietly, unaware that his children were finally learning the cost of forgetting what love was made of. That night, the lights in the Willow Ridge house went out for the last time. And for the first time, Alex and Sarah understood what their father had meant when he said, "You can buy a house, but you can't buy peace." The months that followed were the kind that don't make it into family albums, the kind that stretch long and gray, and leave a man hollowed out from the inside. Alex Miller lived in the back seat of his car, an old silver Ford that smelled of rain and coffee grounds. The leather cracked, the heat barely worked. At night, he parked in a quiet lot near the edge of town, watching the world move without him. He used to pass by those people, the ones standing in line at shelters, holding signs at intersections, and think, "That'll never be me." Now, he didn't think that anymore. He'd sold his suits, pawned his watch, and lived on gas station food and cheap coffee. The once confident real estate man was now just another ghost drifting through the city that had already forgotten him. But one morning, while scrolling through his phone at a public library, something stopped him. A thumbnail, a local community post titled, "Veterans and Their Healing Companions." He almost scrolled past it, until he saw a familiar shape in the preview frame. A dog gray around the muzzle, lying beside a group of children. For a second, his breath caught. He clicked the video. The footage was shaky, filmed under a clear mountain sky. A man in his late 60s was showing a group of kids how to sand a wooden table, his posture still upright, still proud. Beside him, that same dog watched closely, tail thumping every now and then when a kid laughed. It was Echo, and the man was his father. Alex froze. The noise of the library vanished. The world narrowed to the glow of that screen, to the quiet, steady rhythm of John Miller's hands guiding a child. There was no bitterness in his father's eyes, no trace of anger, just calm, the kind that only comes after you've lost everything and made peace with it. Alex sat there a long time, staring at the video looping again and again, until his vision blurred. Then, without really thinking, he packed his bag, filled the tank with his last $20, and started driving west. The road to the mountains was the same one his father had taken years before, winding, lonely, beautiful in a way that made your chest ache. The radio barely worked, so the only sound was the hum of the tires and the wind slipping through a cracked window. By the time he reached the small wooden sign that read Veterans Cabin Program, Aspen Ridge, the sun was already low, painting everything gold. He pulled in slowly. There were children outside, some missing limbs, some in wheelchairs, some just shy and quiet. They were laughing as they sanded pieces of wood under the watchful eye of an older man with silver hair and worn hands. And there he was, John Miller, in a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked behind one ear. Echo lay near his boots, half asleep in the warmth of the afternoon. For a moment, Alex couldn't move. The air smelled of pine and sawdust. There was a peace here he hadn't felt since childhood, not the kind you buy, but the kind you earn by surviving. He finally stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under his shoes. A few kids looked up. John turned, squinting in the sun. Their eyes met. It had been years, but something in that look, that quiet recognition, felt like coming home and facing judgment all at once. Alex swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Dad, I ruined everything you built." John wiped his hands on a rag, studied him for a long moment, and said quietly, "Maybe now you know what it takes to build anything that lasts." No anger, no lecture, just truth. Echo stood, rising slowly on stiff legs. The old dog tilted his head, tail wagging weakly as he sniffed the air, then trotted toward Alex. For a second, Alex froze. Then he knelt. Echo pressed his muzzle against Alex's chest, letting out a soft, tied whine, the same sound he used to make when the world was right. Alex buried his face in the dog's fur and cried like a child. The other children watched from a distance, whispering to each other. John didn't move. He just let the scene breathe, a broken man, a loyal dog, and the silent forgiveness that filled the space between them. When Alex finally stood, John handed him a pair of work gloves. "No use standing around. These kids are building their first table. They could use an extra pair of hands." Alex nodded, still wiping his face. "Yeah, I can do that." He joined the circle. The kids welcomed him without question, passing him a hammer, showing him where to hold the wood. It wasn't much, a crooked table, uneven legs, but by sunset, it stood on its own. John watched quietly, pride flickering behind tired eyes. He turned to Echo, who was dozing again by the porch. "Looks like he found his way back." Echo's tail tapped once against the ground. That evening, after the children left, Alex helped clean up. The air was cool, the light fading behind the peaks. For the first time in years, he didn't feel lost, just small, grounded, like a man who had finally stopped running. Before heading to bed, John poured 2 cups of coffee. They sat in silence on the porch, the same way they used to on summer nights long ago. "You hungry?" John asked. "Not really." "Good. That means you're thinking again." Alex laughed softly. It was the first real laugh he'd made in months. As darkness fell, he looked at his father, the man he'd once thought weak, outdated, unnecessary, and realized he'd never truly known strength until now. Out here, there were no million-dollar homes, no deals, no noise, just the steady rhythm of a hammer, the warmth of a fire, and a dog who still believed in them both. For the first time in a long time, Alex whispered, "It feels like home again." John didn't answer. He just leaned back, eyes closed, and smiled. Some roads, it seemed, didn't end where you thought they would. They just took a little longer to lead you back where you belonged. The snow had just begun to fall again when Alex returned to the cabin. A soft hush covered the trees, the kind that made every breath visible, every sound sacred. He stood by the fence for a long while, hands buried deep in his jacket, watching his father split firewood by the shed, the same rhythm as always, steady, unhurried, precise. John didn't need to look up to know his son was there. Inside the cabin, Echo lifted his head from beside the stove. His once black muzzle had turned gray, but his eyes, those same amber eyes, still carried the same calm vigilance. He stood, stretched, and looked toward the door. When Alex finally walked up the path, his boots crunching against the frozen ground, John paused. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It was just heavy, filled with years of mistakes, pride, and regret. "I came to help," Alex said quietly. "If you'll let me." John leaned on his axe. His breath came out in mist. "Echo decides," he said after a pause. "If he lets you pet him, you can stay." It was such a strange condition that Alex almost laughed. But then he saw Echo standing there in the doorway, tail still, head tilted slightly as if weighing the weight of a man's soul. The dog took a few steps forward, slow, cautious. Alex knelt in the snow, his hands trembling. He didn't call out. He just waited. Echo stopped a few feet away, eyes locked on him. Seconds felt like minutes. Then, finally, the old shepherd stepped closer and pressed his head into Alex's open palm. The moment broke him. Alex bowed his head and began to cry quietly at first. Then, with the kind of sob that shakes something loose inside, John looked away, splitting another piece of wood just to give them both privacy. That night, Alex stayed. He fixed the broken window latch, mended the shed roof, and fed Echo by hand. Every small act felt like a prayer, clumsy but honest. John didn't offer praise, but now and then, Alex would catch his father's eyes softening, the kind of silent forgiveness only men who have seen too much can give. Days turned into weeks. Snow turned to rain. The woods came alive again. John taught Alex how to sand down the edges of a table, how to measure twice before cutting once. "Patience," he'd say. "That's the part most men skip." One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the cabin window, Sarah's car appeared on the road. She stepped out hesitantly, holding a small duffel bag, unsure if she even belonged there anymore. Echo was the first to notice. He trotted out to meet her, tail wagging gently, as if to say it's okay now. When Sarah saw her brother again, she hesitated. Then she saw Echo, older, slower, but still kind, and knelt to hug him. "I wish I had your kind of heart," she whispered into his fur. John came out of the cabin then, wiping his hands on a rag for a moment. All three just stood there, unsure what to say. Then Echo barked once sharp, commanding as if calling them back to the present. Inside, they sat by the fire. No one made speeches, no apologies rehearsed, just the crackle of burning wood, the quiet rhythm of breathing, the occasional sigh that said everything words couldn't. Alex passed Sarah a mug of tea. John leaned back in his chair, the lines on his face softened by the flickering light. Echo lay stretched out between them, head resting on Alex's boot, eyes half closed but alert, always alert. It wasn't a grand reunion. There was no miracle, no dramatic resolution, just the slow rebuilding of something they'd all forgotten. Home. John glanced around at his family, fractured once, now quietly whole, and whispered, almost to himself, "Guess it's just us again." Outside, the storm passed, the night sky cleared, revealing a million stars scattered across the dark. Inside the cabin, warmth lingered, not from the fire but from forgiveness. And Echo, the old soldier, kept watch as always, guarding not a war zone this time, but something far rarer and far more fragile: peace. Winter had come quietly that year, soft and silver, the kind of season that asks for stillness more than movement. The cabin sat tucked between tall aspens dusted with snow, smoke curling from the chimney in slow, unbroken lines. Inside, Echo lay on his old blanket by the fire, his breathing shallow, his paws twitching now and then as if chasing something in a dream. John sat beside him, one hand resting gently on the shepherd's chest, feeling each rise and fall. Alex and Sarah were there too, sitting on the floor nearby. None of them spoke. There wasn't anything left to say. For 15 years, Echo had been more than a dog. He was a bridge between worlds, between war and peace, between pride and forgiveness. He had seen John at his lowest, guarded him through sleepless nights, and later became the silent glue that brought his children back. The fire cracked softly. Echo's eyes fluttered open once, meeting John's. There was no fear in them, just a quiet recognition of a duty fulfilled. "Easy now, boy," John whispered, his voice trembling. "You can rest." Echo's breathing flowed. A few seconds later, he exhaled one last time and didn't inhale again. The cabin went still. Outside, snow began to fall heavier, like the world itself was lowering its voice in respect. Alex reached forward, touching Echo's fur. Sarah leaned into her father's shoulder, tears silent, unforced. For a long time, they just sat there, three hearts bound by the loss of one who had never needed words to love them. The next morning they buried Echo beneath the big aspen behind the cabin, the one that always turned golden first in autumn. John carved the headstone himself, his old soldier's hands steady as ever. When he was done, Alex and Sarah knelt to place it into the earth. On the smooth stone face, the words were simple: "He was loyal, even when we were not." When it was done, John stood back, staring at the little mound of snow-covered earth. Alex spoke first. "We lost your house," he said quietly, his breath clouding in the cold air. "But we want to rebuild this one together." John didn't answer right away. He looked at the cabin and its roof patched in a dozen places, its walls scarred but still standing. Then he looked at his children. Both changed, both finally grounded. A smile, faint but sure, crept across his face. "Guess it took losing $1 million house," he said, "to realize what home really costs." They rebuilt everything from the ground up that spring, not with blueprints or contractors, but with patience and purpose. The three of them and a few of John's old veteran friends turned the cabin into a small retreat for veterans and therapy dogs. They called it Echo's Rest. The first time a group of children arrived, some shy, some withdrawn, Alex watched as the dogs greeted them, tails wagging, eyes bright. He felt something inside him settle, the sound of laughter, the smell of pine, the steady rhythm of hammers from the workshop, all of it wove together into a kind of peace he'd never known in the city. Sarah took charge of the community garden behind the cabin, teaching kids how to grow herbs and vegetables. John would sometimes sit by the porch, whittling small wooden dogs and handing them out as keepsakes. He never said much, but the quiet pride in his eyes said everything. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Alex hung a new wooden sign above the gate. The words were carved deep and clean: "He was loyal when we weren't and taught us how to come home." John stood beside him, hands in his jacket pockets. For a long while, They both just watched the light fade across the meadow. You think he'd like it? Alex asked. John chuckled softly. He'd probably just steal your sandwich and take a nap. They laughed, the kind of laughter that comes only after everything else has been healed. In the distance, the children played fetch with the new therapy dogs, their shouts echoing through the valley. The air smelled of wood smoke and wildflowers. Sarah came out carrying mugs of coffee, handing one to her father. For the first time in years, John didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like he was living. As twilight settled over the forest, the cabin glowed warm against the snow, its windows spilling gold onto the white earth. The sound of hammers had quieted, replaced by music, laughter, the crackle of the fire inside, and above the door, that sign swayed gently in the mountain breeze, whispering the truth that had taken them a lifetime to learn. Home was never a place. It was the act of returning again and again to the ones who never stopped waiting.